Yeah, let's kick it off. All right. All right, I think we're recording now. So, welcome everyone. Happy February and welcome to Adobe Analytics Champions Office Hours. My name is Andy Lunsford and I'm an Associate Director of Data Instrumentation at Razorfish. So, my team works with the architecture and implementation analytics for our digital analytics team to report and gain insights from. I've been lucky enough to work with analytics in the legal, grocery, financial, automotive industries in my career. I've worked on both large GTM to launch migration and owned a large report suite consolidation projects. And I've learned a lot from both these experiences about scalability and governance. A bit of housekeeping before we just hand it off to the other amazing champions who are on this call to introduce themselves. This session is being recorded. It is being recorded right now, so it'll be available on the Adobe Analytics user group YouTube channel. So any questions we don't get to or if they invoke further discussion, thought-provoking discussion, that we don't have time to cover here in our hour, we'll be continuing on Experience League. With that, I'll hand it off to Jason, if you want to do your introduction.
Omniture. I've helped Adobe and Omniture write their certification exams and have been, this is my second year as an Adobe Analytics Champion.
Hello, this is me. My name is Megan Powers. I am a senior manager at CarMax. I lead a team that is responsible for capturing all pieces of digital data across all of our digital properties. So the team is half analysts, half developers. And been working in the Adobe Analytics Site Catalyst Omniture world for 10 to 15 years or so, second year champion. Happy to help answer any questions I can in this session, or reach out via LinkedIn or anything like that as well.
Hi, my name is Christelle. So I work for Gen Digital, and we're a security software company. We have brands like Norton, LifeLock, Avast, AVG, CCleaner, Reputation Defender, and so I manage Adobe Analytics for the company. I do everything and anything Adobe Analytics and not much else. And yeah, I'm a third-time champion, and I've been doing analytics for almost 2 decades. So very, very long time. All the old names Adobe used to have: Omniture, Visual Sciences, HBX, all that. So it's been a long time, and I'm happy to help any way I can. And if there's something we don't answer, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or in the chat, and we'll help you afterwards.
Awesome. All right, I think we're good to go and get started. Let me share my screen. Oh, of course. There. We'll avoid that wonderful optical illusion there. We'll just jump right into workspace. So this is the link to the recording of the office hours. I believe it's already been shared inside the chat. Oh, is it still showing that view? Oh no. Let's fix that. Technical difficulties there. Apologies for that. Let's throw this window over here and see if that fixes the problem a bit better. There we go. That looks much better. Yeah, I think this has already been put in the chat for the YouTube link for accessing this video after it's recorded and uploaded. And we'll jump right into the first question, pre-submitted question. So what technologies, programming languages, and tools should Adobe Analytics developers or analysts learn 5 years from now? And Megan, you had a take on that you wanted to jump into?
I muted myself and then couldn't unmute. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. So big caveat, I am not a developer. No one wants me in there writing code. But since I have developers on my team, they typically describe their current skill set as vanilla JavaScript as to what they're doing. another skill set I think that will be really helpful is to understand how event-driven data layers work. That's become Adobe's recommended best practice and foundational platform on which to build app measurement, but also the SDKs. And so having a good understanding of how the EDDL works, the event-driven data layer, and the diagrams architecture behind it, I think will be really helpful. The EDDL is a more my team doesn't own, for example, the code bases that we implement tagging on. So it's a more agnostic way for those teams to publish events out to the data layer that Adobe launched and listens for. But our team has to have a good understanding of that to be able to write the tech spec, talk to those teams about what they need, and then do the Adobe launch configuration on top of that. I'd also stress the importance of understanding the Adobe Web SDK. I think that is also, the way of the future. That'll be important not only now because it vastly improves page load speed and site performance, core web vitals, etc., but also allows third-party server-side tags to be built on top of it, which, as many people probably heard, Google has announced that they're deprecating third-party cookies. They've already started, but really in September of 2024. And so the SDKs kind of be prerequisites to add those third-party tags to keep those programs moving efficiently. So that didn't get into many specific programming languages, I'm sorry, but hopefully give some of the tech folks some skills they want to go think about learning and building and implementing on their teams.
No, definitely. I would agree with like the event-driven data layer piece too. I mean, that's becoming much more commonplace. ETLs are becoming the buzzword, kind of like how AI is the buzzword for other technologies. ETLs becoming the buzzword in the analytics space. To add on to that, I think short answer would be it depends. That's the common answer. But the long answer is I would probably focus on the programming languages as being more of the tool set to the type of work you want to be doing and the type that to support your business and your own personal professional growth. That being said, so if you're working the implementation side, like as my team and myself do, obviously having a good understanding of JavaScript and just different architectures that are involving using like vanilla JavaScript's a great one, but knowing jQuery, React, how it impacts the site can be very helpful. Knowing how the site will behave, especially if you're doing like extensive tagging work, like ideally, even in the most simple implementations and using just an event layer to fire off something, which would be the perfect case scenario. There's some times where you have to get a little bit more fancy and do some DOM scraping if you really need to get something on page that's not being made available easily. And knowing JavaScript would be very helpful for that. And it's also kind of good to understand too how these data layers are working and how they're collected and how information is pushed to them. And then obviously I know we've mentioned event-driven data layers. Adobe has their own one, the Adobe Client Data Layer that renders that Adobe data layer and allows for a lot of really great mapping pieces there if you're not going an agnostic route and you're going full Adobe stack. I know AEM already has like a built-in support for the data layer. I will say there's probably some configuration that needs to be done to make sure you can capture it because right now it just pushes as CMP show and CMP hide events. So it's a little bit like not super like useful out of the box for probably most measurements that you might have, but it's kind of a nice piece to know. And yeah, as the web SDK piece is concerned, everything's kind of written out in a schema format in JSON. So familiarity of JSON schema is getting more and more beneficial to have if you're working with data sets, especially in the future of like CJA and Adobe Analytics with web SDK mappings. But going even past that, if you're not someone that's caring about like the implementation piece and you're focused on just like diving into the data and just like learning from insights, it might be worthwhile to like look at languages like R and Python that let you do really cool things with data, just automate some processing of it, take exports from Adobe Analytics and do some cool stuff with it. And obviously the old school one that's, I think, still very relevant, SQL is a great language to know, just to know how to work with databases outside of data collected in Adobe Analytics. It's always a good one. I'm sure there's plenty more you can dive into, but I would really focus it on learn the skill set like in language that is going to be help you further your own personal goals. I would avoid trying to get into the habit of like, oh, this is the hot new language, because languages are going to change. They're going to build. Like we're going to get better at building some of these new like platforms. Sites will change. Focus on the ones that are going to help you best achieve your goals right now.
Those are great points, Andy. Another little one technical note: my developers often end up using or advising other developers on is how to build tagging on spa pages. That's always kind of a tricky aspect to tagging, and so getting a good technical understanding of how to do that in Adobe Launch will be really beneficial for any tech folks as well.
Absolutely. Anybody else on the call?
Well,
final point to add?
maybe I don't know if I didn't hear it. Maybe you said it, and maybe I just didn't hear it. But familiarity with CSS selectors.
Yes.
I know it's not exactly per se, but I think it's definitely one of the first skills when I ever got involved with tag managers. Was one of the most important things to learn how to. I mean, ideally, you have an event-driven data layer or a data layer, but very often we're stuck having to scrape the DOM to grab some value or trigger some on a particular event. And ideally, you need to be aware of CSS selectors and how you can target those so that you can either trigger a rule in the tag manager to fire on the click of a div of some ID, or to on the load page grab some title tag or some other piece of text somewhere to pass into a variable. I think they're definitely worth your time to kind of pick up and learn in terms of how to grab those things for when you inevitably have to scrape the DOM because something's not in the data layer, probably.
Fantastic call out in the CSS selectors. Yeah, I did not mention that, but that is an absolutely fantastic call out, because yes, CSS selectors are their own language sometimes, in the way you can get really like fine-tooth with grabbing things. I've seen situations where implementations just say, oh, fire on A tags, and you're then kind of dealing with the consequences of that, as opposed to being a little bit more, right?
I'll add for bonus here to say, when you ask your developer to create a data layer for you, and they're doing it, be able to triggering data layer events, but they're technically sort of scraping the DOM to create your data. I think you're not the layer that is not really DOM scraping. So yay, we're getting a real data layer here that's in the back end. When they have a JavaScript file scrapes the DOM, set your page name a dot title, or an H1 tag on page. So something to be aware of even when you talk about event-driven data layers, is just to make sure that it's not really just done behind the scenes, and when that DOM changes or the HTML on the page changes, that your supposedly event-driven data layer blows up on you. Something also to be aware of. So.
A great way to find that out is when you start seeing foreign languages pop into your reporting, because all of a sudden it's a translation. You're like, wait, our site's not available in Spanish. Oh. Jump right into the next one. How can we achieve similar persistence of the ECID and CJA that we have in Adobe Analytics? In Adobe Analytics, the unique visitor based on MID stays forever, but in CJA, the max limit is only 13 months. Please explain how more we can achieve similar persistence of the ECID and CJA, no expiration.
I'll take a shot at answering some of this. I'm going to ignore my first 3 bullet points in that response, because I think I misread it the first time. Because I'm more talking about in those first few where to map them and stick them in a different place. But basically, I'm not aware of, Andy, and maybe you are, Megan, anyone else, of the persistence of the ECID or the visitor ID value being necessarily different from application to application from Adobe Analytics CJA. But that being said, probably my recommendation as an ideal way around this in a CJA environment is to bring your own ID, to not necessarily rely upon the ECID value set by the Web SDK. Deprecation of cookies was mentioned, a few minutes ago, coming up, inevitably. And, if you can set your own visitor ID with people, especially set that in a first party context and just ID your own value, use that as the person identifier in CJA, that's probably the best approach there, because then at that point you are in total control of the life of that. I'll also say that there is the concept of in CJA, you can have a primary ID, and then what's called a transit ID, and that is, if you have an authenticated experience and start to stitch data together through CJA to provide a little bit even better life to that identification. And in the future, I believe, don't quote me on when this is actually going to happen or not, but the identity graph that's available in real-time CDP is going to make its way into CJA so that you can even have more options to stitch things together for a longer, more accurate identification of a person. I think that's kind of what I had to say there. I think there was a comment that I had there. I'm sure I'll think of it as soon as we move on.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I would agree with a lot of that. I think
I know what my thing was going to be. No one's going to hold on to a cookie for 13 months. People are going to, browsers are probably going to delete that way before 13 months, and I don't think that's probably an issue anyway, just for that reason alone. Andy, go ahead.
No, definitely. I would agree with that, all of that. And I think data retention piece, I found this, by default, it seems to be, I think, 25 months. I know they can be extended, but you might want to potentially look and make sure that that is being persisted forever currently, because it might not be in your case. I think the good approach is to have they set your own visitor ID, as Jason. I would echo that, because you're going to have the most control over the way that's set. And also, depending on the reporting goal you're trying to solve for, ECID persistence, you might have another identity point that would be a better piece to map into that identity, especially since we're talking about like long-term engagement. The ECID is not going to be able to kind of capture across device. You're going to have, if someone comes on your phone and doesn't come from the desktop site, those are two different visits. And for your reporting purposes, you'll probably want to view that as a person and view that as people, as opposed to the separate devices. I know, I think the CJA is is trying to roll out similar identity graph with that's in RTC, like the real-time CDP, but I think that's slated for sometime this year. But I would definitely look into alternate IDs to stitch there, or I mean, you can always use a universal ID that's set from your personal the actual application side, which echoing Jason's suggestion on that, I think will be the best way to kind of map a user across channels, especially if there's an authentication piece, because that can really be good. And I think obviously this is also bit dependent based on what industry you're in. Like if you're on a site that's like banking, or an industry like banking, a lot of the user identification happens with customers once they've already authenticated. So it's a little bit easier to say, oh yeah, you know exactly who the user is, as opposed to a retail site, which might be a guest checkout.
Yeah, we set our own internal IDs too. We have an unauthenticated ID as well as an authenticated ID and an ECID. And having, it sounds, redundant, but they actually serve different purposes and can help tie all those sessions together. Because once you authenticate, then you can go back and look at all those sessions before that where they weren't authenticated. So I would echo that. And what you just said about the retention policy, I think you can contact your client care maybe and get an extension on the default if you need to.
Yeah, I've heard they do that as well. Like the norm is 25 months, but then you can talk to your rep to extend
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I
The
think we have
only thing
36.
I'll add, and I think you guys have more experience here than I do, is the ECID is really core to Adobe products. So it's what Adobe uses on the back end to stitch like other products together and to, it speaks to like all its products. So it is, even if you use your own identifier, make sure that ECID is well in place for all your
Yeah.
sites, all your apps, all your calls, because that's what they use Adobe on their end to, to stitch everything together, like even between tools. I think this really depends on your industry because, like, if you have something, if you have sites where people, you're not forcing people to authenticate, and I think that's a lot of companies. It's hard to use that ID as consistently. Like maybe you seem to have two, authenticated and non-authenticated. Yeah, for I think for a lot of companies, especially if they have several brands, that will be a bit difficult. I know for my business.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about the idea. Like, make sure you still have ECID set up being captured because, yeah, especially if you're using other Adobe tools, like ECID is like the standard that communicate across them. So even if you have your own ID that you're deploying that way out, it's still value in making sure that that ECID is set up so that you have that connection. Jumping into the next question, flow reports are.
If it's okay, can I say just one last thing? I guess Josh just posted this in the chat too about the visitor ID. It's not really based on look at documentation. It's not visitor ID or the ECID's persistence per se that seems to be the issue reference there. It's more that in a data view, if you're looking, the ability of a data view within CJA to call someone a returning visitor, it's thing about CJA and the way that it looks at things operates back 13 months. So I don't know that it necessarily means that you're going to get a new ICD or anything like that after 13 months. It's more just a limitation of the way that CJA currently works in terms of how it looks back, like how long it looks back, that it's keeping data and stitching things together to know that it's a return visitor. I think that's also definitely worth noting. Link to that document too.
Any last thoughts before I scroll down? I think it's a great one to call out. So jumping into the flow reports, consistently getting questions like, what are the top 25 paths leading up to an order? Flow report is clunky and there are 1,000 different combinations at a page level. There's also a limitation on how many steps one can pull in the flow report. Anything after 5, the system gets really laggy. Thoughts? I see Crystal and Megan, you both have opinions on that. Crystal, do you want to go first?
I guess I will. I'm not sure I have such a great answer, to be honest. I have like a love-hate relationship with flow reports. I'm sure I'm not alone here. I think Megan made some great points as well, which I use also at my company. But basically, the thing is like flow reports, I tend to use these to find issues. I tend to use them to kind of like backtrack or forward track and find issues in the flow. I use them mainly on a QA basis, to be honest. And when somebody tells me like, what are the top 25 paths? I really try to, the first thing I do is I go back to the requester and try to segment down what they're saying. Because a lot of times, like, I don't feel like they understand, even what they mean by what are those paths. But Adobe has done some great enhancements in like recent year or two to the flowcharts. One is you now have the option to end the flowchart like with a specific event. So you can't put a dimension in there, but you can put like order or cart addition or any other of your success events. So that's a great way to put that in and then work backwards from the order. But as the person who asked this question pointed out, the problem is when you add page, it's just so granular. It becomes so crazy so fast, you can't make any sense of it. And this is why I think it's really important to track what I call like properties. So we have a lot of like different sites and different subdomains and all that. And to me, all of those are a property, and that's like the highest level. And then within that, we track subsections for each one. So if, for example, we take like Norton.com, that would be a property. And then within there, we have, products and services, and we have blogs, and then we have this, that. So we do that. We do like a few, just actually a couple levels down. Like, so the property, the subsection, subsection, then the page. And if you have that level of tracking, you can look at groups of pages instead of looking at pages. And I think that really helps to declutter the mess and look at things at like a much higher level, and then maybe dig in if you need to. Um, the other point was maybe just simplify it and look at something like just a simple table and put orders and put entry page. And you can even filter on the entry page for a specific site or for a specific section or something contained in your entry page. So that's the other way that I do it. And then Megan pointed out, so I'm going to give her credit for this one, but I actually do the same thing. If you track previous page name in a separate EVAR, you can use that as well to see flows in tables and not have like a chart that gets so crazy so fast. So I don't know, flowcharts, honestly, I tend to just mess with them until I get what I need. And sometimes I don't really get what I expect, or I don't get it in a format that is always usable. So yeah, love-hate relationship. I'll let you guys add more to that. Maybe Megan, you seem to have experience with it.
Sure. It can be a messy view, but like Crystal and I have kind of written here, it can be helpful in certain scenarios. Where I end up using it the most is, like Crystal said, picking an end point, either a page, a channel, or like most often like a KPI, like an event. Say, what are all the things that led directly to that? And that could be immediately before, or starting from entry, like what led to that. And it sounds like we both do the previous page EVAR, which is really helpful if you want to look at that page level on that granular basis, but just want like a whole big list without all the pathing. And then we also, it sounds like both do the like a tiered hierarchy, whatever you want to call it, but like Chris was saying, they use like a subsection and a page and a the one above that. We do too. So like we'll have, we have hundreds or thousands of URLs for our search, for example. We kind of templatize those into a page name on the most granular basis, and then URLs, I guess, are even more granular than that. But above that, we'll have a subsection, and above that, the channel name is just search. So at a higher level, you can see, did someone go from home to search, and in our case, to a car page, to a lead submission, without seeing like, did they go to this car page, or this car page, or this search page, or this search page, and all the granular. So that tiered structure of page naming can be a really helpful way to have a cleaner view of the flow report, because it can be useful, like in those cases. And then, like I mentioned here, another thing I will use the flow report for is to quickly create sequential segments. So, like, say someone went from here to here to here. I'm interested in that path, that node, so I'll do the right click, and that creates a sequential segment for me instead of having to just manually go in and do it.
Yeah, that's a great tip. The right click, I also use that for fallout or funnel reports. When you see something interesting, you can like focus on it and then use that. The only thing I saw somebody in chat said, like, is there a better company for doing pathing? I actually think Adobe is really, really great at this. It's not the Adobe capability that's off. It's often either the person who posed the question didn't make it focused enough for you to be able to answer it in your sea of data, because you don't really know what they want. And secondly, like just being able to look at the data in a way that's not crazy. But the flow reports are really awesome in like their visualization and their ability of what you can do with them. And I think Adobe is really the best at saying like, okay, has to end with this, has to start with that, has to segment with this. The only thing that I really dislike with flow reports is I always have to like put them in a separate panel to be able to apply a segment, because you can't apply like a segment directly in there. So that's a little problematic, but you can get around it. Yeah, so you just have to know how to use them is really what it is. And I don't know another company, maybe you guys do. I don't know another company that does this.
I mean, we don't have like 10 different analytics, tools or companies to play around with, but I've done a couple, and Adobe seems to be the best. Just in general, I'm a little biased, but I think it's the best analytics tool. We have other tools that can do pathing, but they don't typically have as structured data. So you still, even more than Adobe, run into the problem of really messy flow reports, because at least with Adobe, like I said, like we have that structured tiered hierarchy of page naming and channel and subsection. And when we use another tool for pathing, we don't. And so it's even harder. Like URL, we have another tool where we can do URL pathing, but that's super messy. Because, if you think about URL, it's all the like slash variations, like, or asterisks, where you can have even more variability. So.
Yeah, and I see Peter in chat, and he asked the original question. I mean, so there's just no like good, clean answer for you, right? It's like the top 25 paths. Like, what is a path to you? Because if you look at like the full paths, it's going to be insane, right? To look at that. So I would look at, entry page to orders, like whatever your end metric is, right? I think it's like to purchase. So I would look at orders at the end. So when you build a flow report at the end there, it says like metric, I would put orders. And then I would look at the entry pages for those, or even in a table, just orders and entry page.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would look at like maybe just start with like the top 3 entry pages, and then look like for those people who have that entry page, what's the next subsection they do, or what's the next like site they do, or how do they get to the cart, right? Like where did the cart addition happen? Like for people who have that entry page, what is the cart addition? And then backtrack from there. Like from where did they add to cart? So then you start to build like, okay, entry page to cart to order. But there is no, like, you can download by CSV if you want, but I mean, it's going to be such a mess. If you look at like full paths, it's going to be, users don't do like what we expect them to do. They just go in all directions. So I think it's going to be ugly if you try to download it. But
yeah, I mean, a cleaner view is, maybe not to look at all 5 pages ahead, but like 2 or 3, or like pick that endpoint, or do the previous page evar thing. Then you just get the like a true table with like all those 25 things. And one thing I just thought of, it has been a long time since I've done this, but if you've never used Report Builder is an Excel plugin that lets you just pull Adobe metrics straight into Excel. And they have a flow, like a path piece in there. Did any of those champions know what I'm talking about? It takes on a lot of the functionality of the old reports and analytics pathing versus analysis workspace pathing. But that could be a way to do some more Excel type of pathing. I can pull it up real quick, maybe while we do the next question, and see if is still kind of working.
The only thing to me that I think like went away when Adobe, end of life their reports of and analytics, component, which was like a few months ago, was this ability to do full paths. And I can tell you that in like 15 years, I never used that thing. The thing was horrific. It was just like, just this crazy thing. It was just useless to me. I never used that. I tried to, a few times, but it was, it was really crazy. Yeah, pathing and reports and analytics didn't work. So I think you need to like be more, try to consolidate it a lot more, because or else it'll just get out of control so fast.
Yeah, Peter, let me take a look while we maybe talk about the next question in Report Builder and see if that is even an option anymore, and I'll post it in the chat.
The one last thing that I can add that I've seen done is I've seen a situation where you can create a segment where you have your like critical pages, like a user hits during a path. Like, for example, saying this user did this, then did this. And you can create segments if you have this ideal, like this happy path where like you expect users to see. You can create that segment and see if users fall into that path and don't fall into that path, and try to view it that way and hit that segment on there. So you can actually then use all the benefits, like take it a step further, the pathing reports, to kind of see like what the metrics show based on users that go through certain areas of the site, and use it to focus on high level pages. Because echoing kind of the same thing about paths, users don't do what you expect them to do. If you watch enough heat map sessions, you start seeing like, whoa, why is this person going back? Wait, they're going forward again. Users do so things that like just are very I think creates a lot of this like hard like ability to like really get deep into granularity reporting on pathing, because some user might go forward, go back a page, then go back that same page again because they're reviewing something. They'll scroll down, it can get real messy, but focusing on kind of like those key steps is a great way to kind of like highlight if the users are hitting those key points in the path without having to like pull down like this mess of like 25 paths.
I'll add one other thing. It's kind of a little bit along the lines of what you're saying, Andy, I think also, and that's, you can path more than just pages or URLs, right? One of the things that I often recommend people implement is something I've heard referred to as success pathing, where you would populate a prop with something like viewed homepage, viewed product detail page, viewed listing page, watched a video, completed a form, added a product to a cart, completed a purchase. And your pathing is at these more aggregates, so you're not faced with tons and tons of, a million permutations. If you look at your top, number 5 path by page, well, your number 5 path by page is probably followed by like 0.3% of all visitors, because it's just so granular. So thinking about maybe just typing in, implementing some kind of other value path again that's more action oriented as to what your visitors might do might be also useful. Just something else to think about.
And something you can do in the immediate, I would take like cart additions or cart views, cart opens, whatever, like is before the order, like, so to get to your cart, right? And then I would just do previous in a table, not flow. Previous page to to the cart addition, cart view, whatever. Previous page for that, and then also entry page. And then I would backtrack from there and try to find the combinations in between, right? In between the entry page that led to a cart addition, and in between the and what was immediately before the cart addition, and then try to see the groups that are in between. I do think you guys are very sophisticated with the success metrics. That's I think that's the best way to do it, but probably you don't have that implementation ready. Yeah.
No, all great points, and it definitely seems like there's a lot of good discussion on that one that might continue afterwards. So we'll definitely love to like dive into that one more if time permits later. Web and app data in one report suite. I'm collecting both data for both app and web in one report suite in Adobe Analytics. That's awesome. I personally love the idea of that. What to call it before I get further into the question. I think that's a great thing for omnichannel reporting. I want to use this data in CJA using AEP and Source Connector. Not sure how I would create a strategy for connections and data views. Any help would be good. So jumping in, like on my perspective on this, the Experience Link has an article as a great walkthrough of how to set up one step-by-step for report suite data. And I also briefly show the link real quick. It pretty much walks through step-by-step, like how you go about doing it inside AEP. How you can do both report suites and classifications. Select the report suite name. You do your mapping. You can use default schema, or if you have a custom schema you've already built, just map the fields, and it kind of like will show what fields have been applied, and if there's any friendly name conflicts, and kind of like step by step goes through how you would even set this up and get your data to be created from that, which is awesome. I will say regarding the strategy for it, the connections and data views, the big question you have to plan on if you're migrating is if you're migrating over to Web SDK for your Adobe Analytics data, or if you're planning on turning off Adobe Analytics to be fully on CJA. For example, if you're running Adobe Analytics and CJA in parallel, which a lot of people are doing, just while there's some like features in Adobe Analytics that are still needed. I know like alerts is still one that has a planned ETA for CJA has not been, I think, announced yet. And if you're wanting to like move away from Adobe Analytics, then you probably want to make sure that you're getting your Web SDK set up so that you can send directly to CJA and not use only the source connector. And have the Web SDK implementation be at launch. So that way you can like turn that on when you switch over. And regarding the mobile, I can't remember the link off the top of my head. I couldn't seem to find it briefly, but there is a step-by-step guide from how to like implement the mobile SDK to the Web SDK. I think it's like on the App SDK. I'm forgetting the name off the top of my head, but there's the mobile, like the Web SDK equivalent on mobile, and it walks you step by step of how to like leave on the legacy support for mobile SDK in previous app versions and to fully migrate over step by step. And it's a really fantastic resource on the experience lead. And Crystal, I think you called out there's an important, like the important thing to remember is just the connector of the ECID. You want to dive into that a little bit?
I mean, not really, because I think we covered it. I think your points are much better. I don't have CJA, so I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. So I think you have much better points to make than me.
Anyone else had any opinions or anything you want to share on that? It's a complicated one. I think that's one that's kind of still being discussed, and like it really just depends on like a case by case basis. I think a lot of people have different opinions on it. Some people are also using this opportunity too to kind of like refresh and kind of review their measurement framework and see if, hey, what piece of data are potentially we can look at like ideal use case, kind of like a fresh start. So it really depends on what your path is. Like the ultimate flexibility of it is kind of sometimes also the biggest pain point because there's so many different ways you could go about it. So it's gonna be really, I think the biggest thing you can think of is just trying to think of like what your next steps are as you're moving forward with this. I think we've hit the end of.
I would just plan now to migrate to Web when you can. Just don't let it. Yeah. Yes.
And one report suite is always great. That's the best way to go. One report suite.
Yep.
Absolutely. All right. Then maybe questions in the chat that we haven't hit yet. I'm trying to scroll through it.
We have one from Christina. She asks, did anyone have issues with programmatic display trackables stripping off from URLs coming from Google Ads serving platforms like 2mdn.net refers?
I'm not seeing that question in chat, but my chat's also not showing fully for me. So the refer is MDN.
Well,
Can you?
I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen anything specific to that. But I mean, you know, one of the big fears that I have out there, and I'm sure a lot of people have, is that, you know, a lot of browsers, you know, with the deprecation of third-party cookies and other stuff, there has been some discussion about removing well-known, you know, just killing well-known query parameters out of URLs for that are known to be frequently used for tracking. It would not be great if they. Of course, it's Chrome. I'm sure they're not going to start stripping UTM parameters off everything since that's their money maker too. But I don't know. But I haven't seen anything specific with Google Ads stripping any kind of refers off. But I will say it's also up to the referring site to send the refer. They don't have to. I've had some clients where just some partner site that's not really an advertising thing just doesn't pass document.refer across in the same way that years and years ago Google stopped passing the query parameter for the keyword long time ago. If Google Ads wanted to stop passing that, they could, and there's not anything you could do about it to get it unless they sent it along. So, but no, I'm not aware of anything specific there.
I feel like if the Google side to start doing that, there might be some bigger problems just for some that use query parameters to actually navigate through the site. I've seen plenty of sites that actually use query parameter to they shouldn't, but they will use it as like, oh, this is a page, or like using that combination of hash values. So, but yeah, if it gets stripped, but yeah, I've seen that same thing as well, Jason, where I think we actually have a client that their main sites don't pass document.refer, and there's been a workaround because the platform side was like, oh, we don't want to send this because we want to avoid getting value. It was a long historic discussion there, but because of that, we ended up having to add a query parameter for refer, because we needed to know that for having on the reporting side. So there's a lot of interesting things that you can see happen, but I'm not aware of it happening in that specific case. Looking through other questions.
There's an interesting CJA one of which I'm not really sure the answer. It says, if Adobe Analytics classifications are ported over to CJA with the process below where you can import classifications over, will the rules apply to data that's sent directly to CJA? Oh, I understand this. That's interesting. So I guess this is assuming there's two ways data are getting in the CJA, the connector, maybe, right? And then also through some other, maybe it's like partially connector, partially web SDK, and data is getting sent directly. I would assume that the rules, I don't know this for sure. Andy, maybe you can chime in as someone that knows. I would assume it wouldn't, because the classifications are classifications of Adobe Analytics data, not, classifications don't work in CJA natively. They're right. I would assume, no, you wouldn't have anything classified. And if it's and if it says and analytics is deactivated, which is, I would assume, no, also there, because I think that classifications are pretty much an Adobe Analytics thing, really.
Yeah, I don't have much firsthand experience with that specific case scenario, but it does look like it's just source connector. But looking at it, it does look like you have the ability to do both report suite and classifications. My guess is that classifications would be utilized in helping with the derived schema, or like in some of the schema mapping there, how you can like do functionality like the data.
I think it pulls in classifications literally from Adobe Analytics. It's not classifying CJA or AEP data. It's just another type of source connector. Like you have a source connector configuration to pull over the report suites as part of the connector, but then there's also the ability to pull the classifications over. So it's not classifying in AEP or CJA. It's pulling classifications over from it.
Oh yeah, I would have to.
Yeah. So I don't think it would do that at all. I think if you want to mirror the classifications in CJA, I think you either have a classification table, you have a lookup table of data that you upload. That's one option. Another option is maybe it's called the derived field, where you could, if things match a certain, you could have a value populated something else. You can also break things apart with using regular expressions in drills kind of in the same way you can do with classifications. They're not exactly the same, but I think they're pretty close. But I don't think that classifications as a part of that connector will do anything natively within CJA.
See the other question: what are the best tips for moving bots traffic retroactively, and for creating and maintaining standard bot segments for multiple report suites? Adobe Analytics. Thinking, ooh, this is a fun one. This one, my perspective on it is the usually a segment is a great way of kind of breaking that out, and creating a segment that's kind of like your one that's kind of non-bot, and you can like filter out specific bot segments and add them over time as you identify new types of bots based on different user agents. Obviously, there's bot rules that are a great tool to use, but the thing that I find limiting about them is I'm not a big fan of filtering by IP. And obviously, bot rules I don't believe exist in CJA. So that's kind of one system that I don't know if there's. I have to take a look at the product roadmap that's actually planned for CJA or not. But it's no Adobe Analytics. I just read that again. So yeah, if Adobe Analytics, bot rules is a route, especially if it's based off of a specific user agent that you're seeing spike. That's not one. For example, one I saw, I think was on Chrome 100 for Linux. We started seeing millions of users coming in, and I think it was like deprecated in 2013 or something. It was like a year ago, and I was like, okay, yeah, that doesn't seem right. And it's one that like the user agent wise made perfect sense to block, because it was kind of, we will never see like a spike in that traffic again. I think valid actual like success events tied to that segment was like 2, like in the course of its entire lifetime. So bot rules is great if you can identify it to a user agent, if it's like a repeating offender that's hitting a lot of something. But if you need to get like more specific and it's outside of the user agent or IP address that can really be identified well, if it's having multiple IP addresses, segments is usually a good way to kind of filter those out.
Yeah.
Sorry, Megan, go ahead.
We use the IAB that like Adobe has just a checkbox of IAB, like the International Bot Identifier, and we use that. Anything that's not caught by that we identify otherwise, we add to the bot list via like blocking IP address. And as for the removing retroactively, as far as I know, the only way to retroactively remove data from a report suite is to contact like client care, or engage with Adobe. Maybe not even client care, but contact your customer service rep and engage with Adobe engineering to retroactively remove the data. You could also potentially, like if you could identify those bots, you could make a virtual report suite where that becomes a segment, like those bots or the absence, the exclusion of those bots, and make a virtual report suite that's a copy of your existing report suite without that traffic, if you wanted to do that. So those are my suggestions.
Yeah, I don't know about retroactively. Maybe data sources can help, but I don't know. But at a very basic level, first thing you should do is go into like admin report suites, and then in there go in, I think it's general, and you have like something called bot rules, and make sure that it's just a checkbox. Just make sure that's enabled, and that'll filter out like a lot of bot traffic. The other thing that you can do is set up like a processing rule to take user agents and throw it into an EVAR. And then if you see, just monitor it. And if you see like a crazy spike, or you can put an alert on it, right? That's what I do. And then if you see a crazy spike, you can look into it. And if it doesn't look legit, you take it and you add it to that bot rules, like Megan was saying. That's what I do. So I just monitor it. But retroactively, I don't know. Yeah, virtual report suites is probably your best bet.
Yeah. I like clean, Jen. Nice. But yeah, I think Adobe will, it may be a paid effort, but I think that if it's truly a problem, you can ask them to retroactively go and remove data, but it's quite an endeavor.
Yes, getting data out of report, as a good rule of thumb, getting data out of report suites, getting it removed, is always a big lift. So you're better off to try and filter it out, unless you absolutely need to have it removed for specific cases, like if it's PII or something where it's oh, this is something that's a problem. Generally, what I've seen most clients I've worked with has been, it's better off just to filter it out or just kind of cut away and then account for it so that you don't let it pollute further.
Yeah. And then, speaking of PII, we as a policy do not ever capture PII data in Adobe Analytics because you can't retroactively disable it, right? So that would violate GDPR and CCPA type stuff where a customer asks not to be tracked. We have ways in our data warehouse systems where we can delete or anonymize that data, but we can't do it in Adobe, so we just don't track it there.
Adding to that thread about PII, a big red flag I kind of call it is if you have activity map and you have anything where you have links, names. The case of that is if you're in a financial industry or anything where someone logs in and your name's a link. Make sure you have something set up your activity map to prevent it from triggering on those pages, because that can result in some fun discussions where you might find out that, oh, I've been capturing people by clicking on their names to view an account number. Or you click on an account
number.
Don't
make a clickable social security number.
Yes. Just because you don't have a EVAR for it doesn't mean that activity map might not find it.
Right. Yeah.
That's a great point. For that processing rule I mentioned, in case you want to set that up, what we're doing is if the Adobe Visitor ID, so ECID, if that's not available, not present, then put user agent into an EVAR. So in case you want to set that up, it's an easy thing you can do with processing rules, and that way you can at least if you see something, go crazy, you can filter it out. Maybe not retroactively, but yeah.
Adding to that, if you have access to your launch implementation, you can set up a data element to set as a global variable to just say window dot. I think it's a user agent. Yeah, locator.user agent. I forget the exact JavaScript variable, but you can. That's set up inside the window environment, so you can use that to just directly set it there, even before it gets the processing rules. If you want to avoid using processing rules for whatever reason, you can set it at the launch level. So that's fun too. I know we were at time, but thanks everyone so much for these great questions. Yeah, and I think we'll keep reviewing these, and we'll try to get some of these answered inside the Experience League link, which I think we'll be sharing out as well. And did we ever get an answer on that PDF? I think we were gonna get that sent out via people who attended. It'll probably be available on Experience League as well. I think that's everything. So everyone, thank you so much for your time. It's been great being here. Lots of great questions, and look forward to seeing more of them in the future. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining, Andy. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank
See
you.
you next time. Bye.
Sorry.